In the late 19th century, academic theology attempted a massive intellectual domestication project. Scholars sought to reduce the divine to a predictable moral equation. Immanuel Kant's philosophical framework dominated this era. Under Kantian logic, the concept of the holy was equated with an absolute holy will, the ideal of perfect moral goodness. This Enlightenment optimism systematically excised the rough edges of belief. The terror, the unpredictability, and the crushing awe that originally defined ancient faiths were stripped away, leaving behind a sanitized ethical system. But this hyper-rational approach contained a significant flaw. It failed to account for the actual phenomenology of human religious experience as it has been recorded throughout history. While academic texts presented a neatly ordered universe of moral duties, ancient scriptures and mystic journals detailed a visceral reality. Encountering the sacred in these accounts was a devastating shock to the system. To accurately map the sacred, scholars would have to abandon the safety of ethical logic and examine the root of religious dread. German theologian Rudolf Otto broke that intellectual stalemate in 1917 with the publication of his work Das Heilige, or The Idea of the Holy. Otto's worldview was initially formed within the rigid confines of Northern German Lutheranism. This imposing architectural environment trained him in strict, traditional European dogmatics. However, a global research trip between 1911 and 1912 forced Otto to look beyond his Protestant framework. Traveling through the Middle East and Asia, he observed deep religious devotion, like the reverence directed toward weathered stone icons of the Buddha, that operated entirely independently of Western ethical structures. Yet the expressions of absolute awe were identical. Otto formed a central thesis. Moral and ethical codes are a secondary layer built on top of the true core of religion. Beneath the geometry of rational ethics lies what Otto called the sensus numinous, the feeling of the numinous. He argued that this numinous feeling is a sui generis, a unique and irreducible state of mind. It is an a priori category of human consciousness that cannot be logically deduced, only subjectively felt. By identifying this core, Otto shifted the study of religion. The encounter with the divine bypasses human reason entirely to strike directly at consciousness. To map this non-rational encounter, Otto developed a precise linguistic anatomy, famously categorizing the Numinous as the Mysterium, Tremendum, et Fascinans. The first component is the Mysterium. This is not a puzzle waiting to be solved, but a confrontation with the ganz andere, the holy other. The holy other represents an ontological reality completely incommensurable with human existence. It exists beyond our categories of time, space, and logic, defying all language. Coming face to face with this absolute otherness induces a state of blank wonder and stupor. The subject's normal cognitive functions collapse under the weight of the incomprehensible. But this mystery is not passive. This brings us to the second component, the Tremendum. The holy other possesses an overpowering majesty and an energetic urgency. Facing this power triggers creature consciousness. This is the crushing realization of one's absolute insignificance, being reduced to dust and ashes before an infinite force. Otto categorized this as a specific daimonic dread, an existential vertigo that strips the human ego of all its autonomy and pride. The Mysterium Tremendum reveals that the human subject is not a partner in the religious encounter, but a profoundly overwhelmed subordinate facing absolute majesty. Yet a psychological paradox remains. Why does the subject not simply flee such terror? The answer lies in the final component, the Fascinans. The Numinous possesses an alluring, intoxicating dimension that exerts an irresistible gravitational pull on the observer. Rapture and ecstasy accompany the dread, locking the human subject in the presence of the holy. The power of the Numinous was so undeniable that it bridged the gap between theology and psychoanalysis. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung witnessed this exact psychological phenomenon daily in his clinical work. But he relocated the source of the Numinous from the external cosmos to the internal architecture of the human mind. For Jung, the holy other was the vast territory of the collective unconscious. This illustrates Jung's structural model. Deep psychic structures, specifically the archetype of the self, possess autonomous, numinous energy operating independently of individual will. When these archetypal energies surface, they seize the ego, bypassing conscious volition, forcing the psyche into those exact states of rapture or terror. Whether mapped as an external divine encounter by Otto or an internal psychic rupture by Jung, the numinous is characterized by the human ego being completely overpowered. Both Otto and Jung's models share a critical limitation. They define the human subject as a passive victim, acted upon by forces they cannot control. Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik accepted the phenomenological reality of Otto's dread, but he rejected this spiritual passivity. He emphasized the concept of bakasha, the mandate to actively search. The individual must relentlessly move toward the encounter with the divine, despite the terror it brings. This contrasts with Otto's view. Merely resting in the paralyzed awe of the Mysterium Tremendum is spiritually insufficient and incomplete. The crushing weight of the numinous must trigger a charismatic, or action-oriented, response. Raw energy must be contained and directed. Soloveitchik argued that halakha, or Jewish law, provides the rigorous, intellectual framework required to process the paralyzing shock of the numinous. Through this method, the subjective panic of the event is transformed into objective, structured action. The goal is to construct a deliberate framework strong enough to hold the overwhelming energy of the infinite, surviving the shock of the encounter. Formal prayer and rigorous study act as the specific vessels that catch and contain the numinous emanation. Structured action metabolizes raw terror into spiritual intimacy, changing the subject's orientation toward the infinite. This means the intimately unknown is successfully transformed from a terrifying, demonic threat into a sustainable, ongoing dialogue. These three thinkers trace a specific intellectual arc. Otto isolated the raw phenomenon, Jung mapped its internalization, and Soloveitchik provided its integration. Yet the numinous remains the irreducible bedrock of the human condition, an inescapable encounter with the vast unknown. At the edge of our rational maps exists a terrifying reality. It demands not just our awe, but our active, rigorous courage to face it.